Welcome to Getting to Know Your Adolescent with Peyton Williams from Bowbend Consulting. That's me, and our very special guest, Jennifer Rose from Seeking Brain. And Jennifer, before we dive in, I would love if you would just share a little bit about your background and who you are, how you know so much about these teenagers and middle school students, and all that.
Well, thank you, first of all, Peyton, for having me on this and being part of this conversation. I have over 25 years of middle grades teaching and administration experience. So have been a middle school math teacher, a middle school head, and part of AMLE. I was the director of professional development for AMLE, which is the Association for Middle Level Education. So I've been immersed in middle grades students and learning and all of that for my entire career. I'm also the mom of two young adults who I ushered through middle school, even with all the growing pains that entails. But they're both out on the other side and don't seem too scarred from the whole experience. So I think we did okay. And I'm just very passionate about middle grades education.
Awesome. Well, you have got it going on, because I am in the back or the front end of this. I've got one about to launch into teenagedom, and I'm like, okay, tell me about what's about to happen to these children. Help us out here. So let's get going then. Real quick for the viewers, I just want to make sure I put in a little disclaimer here. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not anybody in the medical field. I can't help you with any of that. All of this show is just my experience as a teacher, educator. That's what I'm trained in, and then as a mom. So quick disclaimer there. For my parents are both lawyers, and they were like, you've got to do that every time. So
Same.
Awesome. Well, so today we've got a couple things. We've got the need to know. What do you need to know about teenagers? We've got the might surprise you about teenagers. We've got the don't forget. Okay, if you don't take anything else away, don't forget this. And then for you overachieving parents, we've got the all-star tips. So let's begin with, what do we need to know about, oh my goodness, my internet. There we go. What do we need to know about these teenagers? What are some things that would help us out as we're navigating this?
Yeah, so the biggest thing I would say, which is on here, is change is the norm. So I don't like to always use the word normal. Traditional or typical is easier to use because we have students all sorts of on the place. Every human is its own person. However, there are typical behavioral changes that are happening between the ages of about 9 to about 15. And again, I use those abouts very loosely because, again, students develop at different rates. But their physical, psychological, social, emotional, and cognitive changes are happening so rapidly, it's almost like having a toddler all over again in a bigger body. So we see things like they're tired or they're agitated. I had a student in middle school in my advisory, and I would say, I just need to give you a snack and a nap, because he was changing so rapidly like a toddler. Those are the two things he probably needed to be more successful. And he would nod his head and go sit down with a cheese stick and be okay. But those changes are happening, and it's typical. And we just have to understand that even though it seems sudden, or it seems like it's a 180 from where they were yesterday, it is a very typical thing to happen. So
Jennifer, that's interesting that you say that 9 to 15. I think teenager, and I think 13 to 18, but I guess things are starting maybe a little bit younger than they were when we were kids, or maybe I just didn't know.
Well, so again, it's every body, every human is a little bit different. You have babies who start to walk at 9 months and who start to walk at 18 months. So it's, that's just for a baby with their walking. our teenagers are very similar. And that whole young adolescent phase of development can start around 9 and 10. We may not see all of the changes at 9. It may be from 9 to 15, a slow burn over that period of time. Or it may be they don't start until they're 14 or 15 and they have really rapid changes. And you can see that in the child who's gone off to school. Their teachers are like, yay, it's 6th grade, you're coming back 7th grade. And a teacher might not even recognize the student when they come back the next year because they've grown a foot or they've filled out or, something, other physical changes have happened. And we see that at home, but because we're with them all the time, we don't see that quickly that they do going back to school.
Are there any sign? I mean, obviously they're the physical signs, right? They're the like my pants are too short, my shoes are too small, my suddenly my waist won't fit into my pants and my dresses and all that kind of stuff. Are there any things that as parents we can kind of be on the lookout for where we might go, I wonder if some of this, because right, like you said, it's like, okay, do you need a cheese stick and a nap, or are you just, are you just being a jerk today? Like, because sometimes they are, right? So, are there any things that we could kind of be on the lookout for, like patterns or anything?
Yeah, so the two things are both true. They can be behaving in ways that we feel like, oh my gosh, you're being a jerk today. Why are you rolling your eyes? Or why are you doing that thing? And they might also just need a snack and a nap to help that. But it's because their bodies are growing so rapidly, they do need a higher level of attention to their nutrition. They do need, and we read this all the time, a better sleep functioning and better sleep hygiene. There is a lot going on cognitively. So, and I, can talk about this as it dovetails into the prefrontal cortex. It is not developed. They are trying things out. They are not at a place where they're all thinking abstractly. So saying, hey, here are the consequences if you do this, or the eye roll might be because they're trying to make sense of what's going on in their heads. They're trying to respond to things before they are actually able to respond by stepping back and thinking about it. Some of us as adults, we can take a moment and say, that's interesting. Let me think about that before I respond. And for our young adolescents, it's just response. So that's when we see the eye roll, and that's when we see the lashing out or the quick to anger, or sometimes you might notice that the emotions are they're fine. And then all of a sudden they snap, and then they're angry, or then they're crying. And it's all going on in their bodies in a way that they don't even know what's happening. And that can be so scary for them as well. So, if we were an adult and all of a sudden we burst into tears and we don't know why, that could be terrifying for our young adolescents. They've been not experiencing that. And then they all of a sudden hit a place in their life where everything's out of control. Their bodies are growing. They're really curious, but they don't know how to ask the question. They're going through the social emotional things where today this is my best friend and we just had a fight, and tonight they're not my best friend anymore. So there are just so many things happening. They take things more personally because they aren't seeing those nuances and able to step back. So an offhanded remark from their friend at the locker, oh my gosh, are those purple shoes? The tone in which it's said can totally derail a day for a student, even if it wasn't meant that way. So our kids are just going through all of this at the same time. They're really vulnerable. They're looking for connection. They're looking for a way to make sense of the world around them. I love Brooklyn Rainey said something about students or children being like disco balls, and they're reflecting everything around them and spinning around quite wildly. And that really is kind of what's happening. They're seeing things outside of themselves and trying to make sense of them. So it's like I said before, like toddlers in a bigger body. They're just trying to decide, is this food going to be tasty or not? Is this, the same way, is this clothing trend going to be something that I like or not?
Man, Jennifer, everything you just said gave me a lot more empathy for my future teenage children. And I think that feels like something that as a parent might be something crucial for me to know, that I need to remember that always.
And that's the third point that's on here. It's like, it's not always intentional. So, I remember seeing my daughter roll her eyes at me when I was saying we had to go somewhere, or we had to do something, or, she needed to wear this to an event because it was a family event. And the eye roll was there. Well, she wasn't doing it because she was intentionally trying to annoy me or make me angry, even though it did. She was doing that because as a behavior, she was reacting to something, either discomfort or concern or fear or whatever it was. And that's how her body was reacting. It wasn't because she was trying to do it, roll her eyes at me. And once I realized that, it was a difference. She was rolling her eyes for sure. She wasn't rolling her eyes at me. And so taking out that personal, intentional connection where it's not about how she's reacting to me as a person, it was her reaction.
So, and we may tell me if we're going to get to this later, if you're like, oh, I want to talk about that in slide 3. But so, okay, I've got this information. My kid is going through all this business. I vaguely remember going through all this business, however many years ago. I'm going to have some empathy. I'm going to understand that, it's just for a couple of years, but it's going to be pretty tough because, all the stuff you just said. Are there some ways that I can respond then, or any tips for those moments to help me navigate that as a parent?
Oh, I mean, yes. And why don't we talk about like things that are surprising? Because we're going to go right into that idea of that guardrail. So you might be very surprised that even though your young adolescent, your child at home, your kid is rolling their eyes and pushing you away and you feel like they're not connected, they're slamming the door, whatever is going on. They actually want you around. So there is actual research that says those middle school years, even though our kids are pushing us away and saying, I don't need you, why don't you let me do this? They're saying that so we say back, because I'm your parent and that's my job, because I'm here and, part of my job. And, we might talk about this a little bit later too, but I'm just going to throw in the anecdote for my own kids. And I would say my job is to be your external prefrontal cortex. My job is to be that person who can help you self-regulate because you're not there yet in your development. And just getting them on to understand where they are on their developmental journey and having that open conversation. They are aware enough to begin that process of metacognition of thinking about how they're thinking. So sharing all the information, let them have the information. They may not know what to do with it at the beginning. They may not know what to do with, well, your prefrontal cortex does this and that and the other, and this is where but saying I have to be your prefrontal cortex externally is a really strong message to them, and it gives them that guardrail and that safety to say, okay, my parents have my back, or my teacher has my back, and I am going to work within these guardrails of someone else has my back, an adult who actually has some understanding, and I can sort of bounce between where I am and growing up. The difference is when we say we want to be their external prefrontal cortex, it doesn't mean that we're saying you have to do X, Y, and Z. And that's the difference of being a guard dog. Like, we're not going to prevent them from making all the mistakes in the world because we can't. And sometimes people need to learn from their own mistakes. But we're there for the guardrail. We're there to be an external prefrontal cortex and help them make better decisions. And that's why the word help is there. We're not making all the decisions for them.
That's interesting. I love the metaphor of guardrails because I always used to say, your job as a parent is to be the boundary, right? They're like, how far can I go? And your job is to say, here, this is as far as you can go. And they may just smack up against you, and that's okay. That's part of what a guardrail does, is it saves you from going over the edge. So that metaphor is huge because I also think on a guardrail, it's not right there at the road. Kind of like the guard dog parent would be right there, like, nope, don't do that. Don't take that step. Whereas you got a little leeway between the line and the guardrail.
And it's the difference between a leash and a kite string, right? You let the kite string out and you see where it can go, and it's the wind is carrying it, and sometimes not great, and you pull back. But a leash is, that's way too tight for them. A young adolescent is going to really balk at having the leash too tight because it is literally their job to learn about who they are through trying new things. they cannot develop their own sense of self, understand the ethics in the world, understand family dynamics without being able to get curious and ask questions and push a little and see where it fits for them. Having the guardrails is really helpful.
Well, and that seems to lead into something you've talked about, and it's something that we've talked about on the show. There's actually a whole show on it, but just that, it's interesting. I see the importance of play, and I'm thinking, do teenagers like to play things besides games on their phone?
Yeah, I know it's hard to believe, right? But imagine the joy, and you see it out in team sports or even team sports that aren't team. My son was a big like soccer player, team sports guy. My daughter was very happy to do dance or swim or something that was individual. But being part of something outside of the family and outside of school was a really nice way for them to learn about who they were in relationship to other people, peers, but in a different location. So places that they could excel, places where they also had time to sit on the bench and be bored without their phones or without, other distractions, and not necessarily structured by, well, at 5 p.m. we're doing this, and at 6 p.m. we're doing this. And so it was a moderate structure. You're going to, try this out. And it wasn't always the perfect event, but getting them outside, I would say, and I'm sure you've talked about this too, Peyton, fresh air, right? Just being outside, going for a hike, having that part of what you do as a family, maybe, or just involved with the community or volunteering. I always say volunteering and giving back to community is a way of play also, because you're getting to know other people in the community. So doing a community garden and other pieces. So that idea of play still is very important for young people.
And I think too, it also is a way for parents to connect with their kids. Like, so for example, we just did as a family an escape room, and I've got an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I feel like she's already hit puberty because she's, got the eye roll down since 3. But my oldest, right, I'm starting to figure out, like, okay, I've only got a couple years that he will want to hang out with me, and anything from checkers to chess to an escape room to family play too, I feel like can really help strengthen those relationships, because so much of, as you said about the leash and the guard dog and the guardrails, and especially as a parent of teenagers, you might be feeling like all you're doing is worried and angry and saying no, and maybe having some play in there, not just with their friends, although they're going to want to play with their friends way more, but maybe some family play too might help kind of lighten that relationship a little bit.
Yeah, you're spot on. And also that gives you an opportunity to have conversations that are parallel. So that idea of being in the car with your preteen and having a conversation where you're both not looking at each other can also be effective when you're playing a board game with your family and everyone's engaged in another activity, but things come up and the conversations can happen organically around what your family believes in or things that are going on in the world, or give a safe space for a kid to say, hey, this is bothering me, because the family is all in a really nice place together and they're playing.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that idea of a safe space. Okay, what is changes that might surprise us? I mean, you've already told us that we're going to have changes, so why is this surprising? What's going on here?
I remember, and you've probably gone through this and other parents, where the body is changing in ways where it can be embarrassing for adults to want to share what's coming next for their child, or it happens in a classroom and a student is feeling uncomfortable sharing it with another student about their bodies and what happens, and the use of deodorant and things like that. So those big changes, similarly to having your child understand, hey, this is what's going on in your brain, having them understand like literally the physical changes that are going on in their bodies. Everything from, yeah, you're dropping your notes all over the place. It's not because you're clumsy, it's because your body is growing. Yes, we are going to be starting this idea of wearing deodorant every day. And there are great books out there. I mean, a million years ago, my daughter's now 25, but I think when she was 7 or 8, I got her an American Girl doll book on the care and keeping of you. And I just put it in her room. We didn't even talk about it for a while. I gave her time to read through it. And then she would start to come to me and say, hey, and we did have some conversations that were about health and hygiene and body maintenance. But some of it was giving her time and space to look at those changes that she was going through and feel like she could start to understand them on her own a little bit before they were actually happening. So
Mm.
it gave her a place to say, okay, I learned about this a little bit. I have some prior knowledge, and now I can talk about it because it's actually happening and see what that means for myself and my body.
Man, that's a huge tip because I think most parents would be surprised that some advice from middle school experts would be talk to your kids about that stuff before it happens.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Talk about it in elementary school. The more, it's similarly, I was a math teacher for 25 years. It's a similar idea. Like I want them to know how to add and subtract before we're doing the quadratic equation. I want you to talk about that in elementary school because I can't go through more complex thought and complex activities without that foundation there. And as parents, that gives us a place to be part of that foundation and provide information that is really based in our family values, what we believe, and also what's based in like how their bodies are actually going to change.
mm, that's huge. All right. Um, a couple things on here about the don't forget. Obviously, I put this on here, right? Like, remember, like, just take a second to think back. Do you remember your adolescence? I mean, I remember mine, and I just remember feeling like the whole world revolved around me, and that was amazing and so much pressure all at the same time.
Yeah, there are kids who there are adults now who are thinking, oh my God, if you made me go back to middle school right now, I would rather like shovel dirt for the rest of my life. No one wants to go back to middle school, right? Typically. And it's remembering what that was. I mean, when I talk to adults, when I've done professional development days and we're talking about what it was like for you as a middle schooler with adults, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, that was tough. And it's a good thing to remember. And I'm glad you put that on here because it's not always easy.
Right. And that, that I think we mentioned this again at the beginning, but just that, let's have empathy for these kiddos, right? You're not going to get mad at your 2-year-old for having a temper tantrum, or you might, but then you get your, self control and you're like, oh, yeah, they're 2. Okay, let me have a little empathy for this child. And then I've got some strategies. Let me deal with that. That maybe we can, by having some empathy for these, kids who are going through tremendous change, that will help us maybe step back from the emotion of it a little bit.
I agree that empathy is so important. And it's, what I said before, they're toddlers in bigger bodies. They really are, with the amount of change their brains and bodies are going through. So if we can listen to them, because sometimes when they're angry and they're lashing out, and you can just listen and find out what they're actually angry about. It may not be about what they're saying. There may be something underneath going on. So affirming them and saying, yeah, that sounds like really hard. Or that sounds really awful. Tell me more about that. What's going on? It seems like it's really upsetting you. Um, I certainly by far did not do that enough with my kids. When I learned about how to do that, it was very helpful. But it's hard in the moment as an adult because we feel, I'm sure also that empathy part, we feel very upset when our children are upset. When our child comes home and says that someone was mean to them or someone bullied them, I mean, those words are very upsetting. We do not want our children to go through that. And, you know, I like to think that there's a big difference between mean and bullying, and there's a big difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe. And so sometimes in this early adolescence, in this young adolescence, the brain is not wired to understand the difference between unsafe and uncomfortable. And part of our job as that external prefrontal cortex is to get to the center of this. Was this actually something where you were unsafe? Or were you just uncomfortable because you had some feelings coming up about this? And we can be uncomfortable. We grow and learn when we're uncomfortable. We never want our child to be unsafe.
Yeah, I think, that's interesting too, because I think so much of sometimes I, as a parent, I think one of my flaws is that I'll say things like, a friend, they might say, "Oh, my friend left me out." And I'm like, that's not a big deal. Like that happens to everybody. Shake it off. You've got 10 million friends, be tough. And I love the advice just to ask the question, man, that must have been tough. You want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not babying them, right?
Yep.
Or even validating that they, should feel that way every time it happens, but maybe just to help them get past that emotional response first.
And it goes into what you put down next, really, Peyton, because it really is about building independence in them. So when you ask those questions, you're now asking them to use their thinking and their feelings to understand why they were seeing that or what was said or what happened. And you certainly don't want to go down a rabbit hole of that child is really awful and or just to blow it off on one extreme or the other, that 180, but somewhere in the middle, being curious about it and understanding that maybe they need just to talk about it.
Yeah. So, yeah, independence, this is the time. This is when they're kind of saying, all right, leave me alone, mom and dad, let me have a little independence. And I think that's huge too, because just remember that's developmentally appropriate for our kids.
Absolutely.
Talk about what is my job as a parent and some natural consequences.
Okay, so what is my job as a parent? I always said my job is to be your external prefrontal cortex. That was big number one. But I also use the idea of, until you're 18, my job is also to support the growth in your mind, the growth in your body, the growth in your spirit, meaning whatever that means to you as an adult and your family. But your brain, like, yes, you need to go to school. Your body, yes, you need to, take care of your body and hygiene and spirit, whatever that means to your family. For me, it was like we just talk about things together and we had a religious experience, whatever our experiences were. But that's my job as a parent. My job isn't to tell you who to like, who to not like, what to wear necessarily. Although I did tell my daughter when she was 2 that she couldn't wear a bathing suit to school in February unless she wasn't weather appropriate, but that's different. It's that job of helping them navigate mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, um, there's a lot there because I think parents have a hard time moving from, okay, I was the one when you were 0 to 5, I was the one who was teaching you about authority and saying like, no, you can't do that and expecting obedience. From about 5 to 10, I'm teaching you things. I'm like, this is how you do this. But then getting into those teenage years, you get into the kind of like, all right, I'm kind of the coach. I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, try this, right? And that can be a hard shift for parents, I think.
It is because it also changes the idea from obedience or compliance to respect. So we want our kids to respect us as parents. We want our kids to respect us as educators. Compliance doesn't always equal respect. So building that independence and scaffolding that independence so that as they're going from 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, you can give them that independence and authority to make some decisions on their own, as long as they know that those decisions are falling within the parameters and there's certain things that you're going to weigh in on. You're going to weigh in on, yeah, you're going to school. That's part of what your mind has to grow. So giving them the idea of like, this is where my job is. My job is to do these things. So that social media, I was like, no, my job is you can't be on social media unless I have access to all your passwords.
Yeah.
That's your mind and your spirit. Like those are 2 of the things that touch that. So I'm involved in that. And just making that really clear from the outset. Again, those are those guardrails.
Yeah, that's huge.
And
And I
that goes
think,
to consequences, like you said. Consequences aren't inherently bad. You win a trophy, that's a natural positive consequence to positive something happening. There are negative consequences that are natural consequences, losing a friend.
right. Well, and I think too, okay, you didn't do your laundry, you don't get the clothes you want to wear, right?
Oh,
Or, oh, you didn't set the table. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess you don't get to eat with a fork until you help us out, right? Like it's like there's some natural things that again, you're not compliant, like the consequence is the thing that is helping your child make the decision. And then that allows you to be the coach and the respect and that kind of stuff.
exactly. Yeah. Absolutely spot on.
So, all right, the all-star tips, one of mine or 2 of mine that I've heard from people is don't freak out when your teen comes to you and they say, hey, my friend Jennifer was doing something naughty online. my tendency is to be like, what? Should you be friends with her? Oh my gosh, right? Whereas maybe they're like, that's interesting. Tell me more. Wow. Is a, I'm like, I'm gonna have to practice that.
Yeah, it's a great tip. I mean, that goes back to curiosity and empathy and really letting the young person figure out, is that really a bad thing or not a bad thing, and giving you time to be okay with what's going on and find out more. As soon as you jump in, they're gonna jump back.
Yeah.
And you
Well, and
want
that
to
brings us to the second one, right? Where it's like sometimes as parents, we think we need to solve the problem immediately, but really being like, okay, I think I need to think about how I want to respond when you told me you wrecked the car. Let's circle back around. Let me calm down. Let me think about this a little bit and then I'll get back to you. Right. Or, oh, I caught you sneaking out. Right now is not the time for me to give you a consequence. Let's talk about this in a minute. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sleeping on it is a great idea too. Doesn't mean that the kid can go out and do whatever they want. It just means we need to circle back, like you said, and I need to decide what consequences are appropriate and what we're doing about this.
Yeah. And I think the last, did I put this one down or did you put this one down? Do you remember? Or where did
Well,
you-
I don't remember, and I think we're both correct on this, and I would have put it down if you hadn't. And this gives them that agency. What do you think we should do next? What do you think you should do next to
Right.
repair? It's about the repair of whatever's happening and understanding their impact on the world.
Mm.
And if something happened where they're responsible, owning it and taking responsibility. I mean, none of us want to raise kids who are entitled and not taking responsibility for their part in something that's happened. We hope that they learn from mistakes or don't make them at all, but they're going to make some. But that repair afterwards is so important.
I think that's huge. And for the non-teachers, what is scaffolding?
Scaffolding is just like anything else. On the side of a building, you put up scaffolding so you can paint as you go, and then you take off the scaffolding when everything is done. So when you're scaffolding agency, that means you're giving a little bit more independence at a time. Like you're doling it out, kind of like that kite string. I put a book in the resources, How to Raise an Adult, and there are things that you can do with your young person that says, from ages 5 to 10, yeah, they can start learning how to do laundry, which means sorting laundry. How do you scaffold that? Well, first, we're going to sort the laundry. How do we do that? We can do it by color or whatever else you decide to do for your own laundry. And then the next thing is, well, then you could put it in the washing machine, or can you take it out of the dryer and fold it? So scaffolding it until they're doing the entire process on their own. And there are a lot of different things you can do: cooking, chores around the house, all sorts of things where you can scaffold agency and give them responsibility for themselves. And then going back through and saying, well, where did we find challenge? If you weren't able to do that and that was frustrating, why was it frustrating? What were those challenges? And where
That
can we?
sounds like, sorry for interrupting, but that sounds exactly like what I wish a lot of parents did when I was a middle school teacher with their children with homework.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
your kid is having a hard time doing homework or remembering homework. Okay, well, maybe as a parent, you need to support a little bit more. But then how can you, little by little, give them that agency? And then I love the idea of debriefing the challenge. Okay, how'd that go? Right? I'm the
Right.
coach, but you're the one doing it.
Right. We always want to circle back. I mean, we want that in our adult, when we're at work with it as adults, we want to find out feedback. So this is a way to get feedback and debrief what's happening, if things are going well or not going well. What are the challenges? How can we go back to it and attack it again? It promotes perseverance.
Well, and that also seems like as an adult with teenagers or adolescents, you are taking the posture of being curious, as you wrote down here, right?
Be curious, be curious, be curious, be curious. It helps when things go sideways, right? So something's not always going to go perfectly every time. So when things go sideways, it gives you a chance to get curious, take a breath, find out what to do next. And it teaches our kids how to be resilient about that as well. So if we're doing it, we're modeling that behavior, and that's also part of the scaffolding, right? We want to model as much of the behavior we want to see in our kids.
Yeah. So not, what were you thinking? That's not actually a curious question, but hey, tell me a little bit about what happened there. Like,
And if you
help me
feel
understand.
like the yelling one, seriously, Peyton, because you do, and I do, if you feel like you want to scream, what are you thinking? Take a breath and walk away and come back and do it a little bit.
Let's circle right back around tomorrow morning. Awesome. Well, Jennifer, you have given us so many good tips, and thank you for the book racks. And there's a bunch of up here. I know you've got a book up here for middle school schools, and tell us a little bit about that real quick so that we can all tell our middle school to go buy it.
Yeah, so it's not just for middle school, for traditional middle schools, homeschools, youth leaders, whoever needs it. It's really activities that talk about that perseverance, self-regulation, curiosity, empathy, team building, all of that. They're either daily activities or things you can do once a week, but they're very young person led. It really promotes that idea that their brain is growing and they have a seeking brain.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If anybody's got feedback, we've got it. Next week, we're doing setting up a home learning environment, getting ready for back to school. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here.
It was such a pleasure, Peyton. Thank